Welcome to chapter 3 of Tin, one of our great books in our 100 book list, and of which I am reading for the second in my Head Teacher Reads series. So here we are, chapter 3. Let's see what happens to our intrepid explorers today. Jack, Rob, Manda and Gripper were waiting for him outside. Together they made their way towards the workshop, which lay directly across the yard from Absalom's shed. The snow was thickening, and the piles of junk were being buried beneath a smooth white blanket. Halfway to the workshop, Christopher heard a terrible squeaking noise, followed by a dull clang. He turned round to see Round Rob's body spasming towards the workshop, minus Round Rob's head. The body suddenly accelerated forwards, spun around twice, and then hit the ground. Christopher sighed. Rob's head was always coming loose. Sometimes the others would take bets on how long his body could keep going without a head. The record was 30 seconds. Christopher walked back past the body and picked up Rob's head. Gripper had already scooped up the rest of him. Round Rob smiled, but Christopher winced at the lock of hair that still hung down over his eye. For some reason, he found that more distressing than Rob's head coming loose. Estelle was inside the workshop gathering her tools together in a canvas satchel. The new skin she'd made for Absalom was stretched across a metal rack. Christopher could tell by the slight glimmer in her eyes that she was pleased with it. Sometimes Christopher saw the same look when she was making her mixture in the workshop's large black pot. She would bend over it, the almost heart-shaped curve of her black hair framing her face. Her lips were always tightly pursed as she concentrated, her eyes dark and intense as she gazed into the pot, mixing and melding, folding the white mixture in and over and on itself like dough, until suddenly and without warning it would develop a fleshy pallor. The trick was to take it out of the pot at just the right point. Take it out too early and it would liquefy and loosen and spill all over the floor, returning to the colour of milk. Take it out too late and it would become a gloopy substance, bobbled with lumps and bumps. Christopher didn't know whether it was through instinct or sheer repetition, but she knew the right moment every time without fail. "Looks good, Estelle, but not as good as your best work right here," Jack said, jutting out his chin and presenting his face to her, pinching the skin on his right cheek and wiggling it. Estelle gave the tiniest smirk and shook her head. "Good night, Jack." She hoisted her bag of tools up onto her shoulder and left the workshop to a chorus of good nights from the others. Christopher went and took out his own toolbox from under his bed. He fixed Rob's head back onto his body, and when he was happy with the fit, he picked up his scissors and cut the offending ringlet that had been hanging over his eye. Round Rob thanked him and gave one of his embarrassed but grateful smiles. Christopher then oiled the hinges on Jack's arms and told everyone to be careful in the snow in case of rust. Jack gave him a mock salute. Christopher took a look at Manda's short leg next and made a face when he saw some of the corrosion on her knee joint. He made a mental note to nag Absalom about it again. Meanwhile, Gripper was swinging back and forth from the rafters like a gorilla. Christopher told him to come down, as he didn't think the beams could take much more punishment. Gripper let go and landed with a crash. Christopher scolded him, but he could see Gripper was pleased with himself and was fighting the urge to do a Gripper grin. Exhausted, Christopher sat on his bed and started to take off his boots. "I think I have dented my bum," sighed Jack. "Told you. I'm not looking at it," said Christopher. Round Rob sniggered, but Jack was frowning. "What's wrong?" asked Christopher. Jack looked a little guilty. "I was kind of hoping that I would be sold." Round Rob gave a panicked little whimper. They all turned to look at Jack. Christopher was taken aback. "Why?" asked Christopher. Jack looked at the floor. I don't know, he said. I suppose I just want to be proper like you. I'd like to know what it's like to breathe and to have real skin, proper skin. I want to know what it's like to be small and to grow and to keep growing. Jack looked straight at Christopher now. There was a fierceness in his gaze. I want to be like you and experience normal but important things. Christopher was lost for words. He suddenly felt uncomfortable and found he couldn't look Jack in the eye. Important things, like knowing what it's like to have a mum and a dad, said Jack. Oh, I don't have a mum and a dad, mumbled Christopher. Not anymore. You know what I mean, said Jack. Tell us what it was like, Christopher. Go on, tell us, said Rob. What was what like, Rob? Asked Christopher. Having a family, said Rob. Christopher felt all of their eyes on him. He was used to their questions about the past, and he didn't mind telling them the stories, but sometimes it just felt a little strange. I don't remember that much, he said, but what I do remember is good. I like it, said Rob, his eyes shining. Manda had perked up. Even Gripper seemed interested. Christopher sighed. There's just snippets I remember, like little pictures. Manda lay on the floor now, with her chin in her hands. Tell us again, Christopher. Go on. They were all begging him now. Christopher shook his head and smiled. All right, he sighed, quietening them. Christopher sat on the edge of his bed with his hands under his thighs. He gazed at the floor as he tried to conjure up images from the past, willing them gently to the surface for fear he might push too hard and lose them. He saw a woman's face. She was in a kitchen and she was smiling. He felt the familiar warm glow bloom in his chest. Mum had blonde hair, he said. It was soft, really soft, and it... The woman turned. Her hair shimmered and rippled smoothly like a wave of light. Christopher swallowed. It was like honey, and it lit up the room. Was she pretty? Asked Manda. Very, smiled Christopher. Very, sighed Rob. Even Jack seemed entranced. She used to bake the best cakes, said Christopher. He could see her now in her apron, checked red and white, her hair shining, streaks of flour on her cheeks and nose. He smiled to himself. And your dad? Asked Rob. Brown eyes, thought Christopher. He had brown eyes, but that was all he remembered. So he did what he always did, and he made the rest up. There was the usual stuff about how good his dad was with his hands. He made things out of wood, toys and tables and chairs. He had a workshop. But not like Mr Absalom's. Better, suggested Rob. Yes, said Christopher. He smiled at the look of wonder on round Rob's face, but he felt the tiniest pinch of guilt. Christopher told them how strong his dad was, and how handsome he looked, and how he kissed him goodnight on the forehead every night and told him bedtime stories. Like you do now, said Manda. Christopher nodded. Tell us about the house again, said Rob. Christopher looked at him and smiled, but the smile was just to hide the sharp spasm of pain he felt. There was that heat again, the sudden shock of a flame licking the air in front of him, ferocious and orange, and the smell of smoke, the crackling of burning wood, the roar, the terrible roar of air being eaten. Christopher squeezed his eyes shut for a moment and sucked in air as if he was trying too hard to remember. There was a brief pause as the others waited. Not tonight, he said. Maybe another time. Is it hard to remember? Said Rob sympathetically. Just a little, said Christopher. Very, he thought, so very hard to remember so very little, and for so very little to hurt so very much. We'll never be proper, said Jack gloomily. But we can be better, said Rob brightly. Just the other day, Mr Absalom said he'd get me a new torso. Jack and Christopher exchanged a look. Rob didn't see it. He says that a lot, Rob, said Jack. But as soon as we make money, said Rob. Jack tried to look optimistic, but it wasn't easy. Just think, said Rob, a new torso, maybe even new legs. We could all be upgraded. Zephyr grade maybe, or even a Pilkington. Pilkingtons don't last, said Jack. A Hockney Mark II then, said Rob. I saw a Cormier original once, said Jack. Did not, said Manda. Did too, said Jack. Me and Mr Absalom were in East Grimstead in a shop, and a girl came in with her parents. She had golden ringlets, perfect hair. She was dead pretty. It wasn't her, was it? Asked Rob. Ellie Lockwood? Yes, Mr Absalom said it was. It was never Ellie Lockwood, gasped Manda. Ellie Lockwood was the most famous mechanical in all of Britain. They said she was 50 years old, but looked like she'd been made yesterday. She went to all the best parties and she was in all the newspapers. It was said she'd even met the king. Did her hair look real, Jack? Asked Rob. Jack nodded. I bet her eyes match, sighed Manda. They're blue too, said Jack. She has the best skin. They say she can blush. I can blush, said Rob. He clamped his mouth shut and started to make squealing sounds. You don't have any breath, Rob, said Christopher. Rob stopped what it was doing. Oh, right, I forgot. Manda giggled. Imagine being like that, top of the range and with parents and all. The nearest thing to being proper, said Jack. Christopher saw the dreamy look in his eyes and felt bad for what he said next. They weren't her parents, Jack. They were her owners. Jack looked slightly annoyed. I know that, but still, top of the range, sighed Rob. No one said anything. A gust of wind gently rattled the door. We should get some sleep, said Christopher. You mean you should get some sleep? We don't need sleep, said Rob. He raised his right eyebrow, which promptly fell off. He tried to lean over and get it, but couldn't reach, and he toppled over and started to roll around. Manda started to laugh, as did Gripper, who clapped his great clanking hands together with delight. Jack righted Rob and picked up his eyebrow and handed it to him. Rob held it outwards towards Christopher in the palm of his hand with a hopeful look. Christopher rolled his eyes good-humouredly and dug around in his toolbox for glue. He quickly reattached Rob's eyebrow and patted him on the head. We'll get you new eyebrows soon, he said. Call me a class, said Rob. All fluffy? Nice enough to run a little comb through? Christopher grinned. Yes, call me a class, absolutely. Round Rob settled into his spot among the junk pile. Manda went to her chair. Gripper sat back against the wall, and Jack leant nonchalantly by the door and listened to the wind. Christopher pulled his blankets tightly round him and lay facing the wall. A vision came to him, a vision of flames and smoke, and he screwed his eyes shut in an effort to banish it. I'll tell you what, though, said Jack, that Ellie Lockwood fancied herself. She had airs and graces, ideas above her station. Christopher said nothing. The flames fizzled out into blackness. Sleep came. In the darkness there was a warm light. He could feel himself rushing towards it. The light became golden. The world became green. He was in a garden again. The sun was low in the sky. He could hear a bird singing as he sat on the grass. He could feel the dull ache in his hip where he'd fallen. He wiped a hand across his face and it came away wet with tears. He looked around him quickly in a panic, but the vision of green and gold was beginning to fade. He cried out and reached blindly with his hand. A shadow fell over him and someone called his name. Chapter 4 tomorrow. Let's see what happens.